It's nice to see you all. Again, I'm Jennifer Berne, and I am really happy to be here. In addition to doing all the work I do in writing, of late, my focus has been on 6 through 12 comprehension, especially how teachers change to adapt to new practices. So today I'm going to take all of the wonderful learning that we had yesterday morning and yesterday afternoon and this morning and try and focus it on very carefully on the classroom. So this is going to be sort of 50 minutes of classroom practices that are very specific, research driven, and I'm anxious to share them. The PowerPoint is on the web. I did add 3 slides when Carol Lee was talking, so you won't need them, but I did add. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay, sorry. But I didn't say anything important, it's fine. Okay, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. I'll say that I've been teaching adults a long time, and I get very worried if I don't get interrupted. So if there's anything that I say that you wanna attend to in the midst of it, I'm really happy to have this be a conversation. So that's me. Okay, so my reading of the standards, and I'll just do this one time because I know we've talked a lot about this. They call 1 and 10 the bookend standards, because if you look at 1 and 10, 2 through 9 are subsumed. So if students are doing close readings of complex texts, guess what else they're doing? They're doing 2 through 9. So you cannot determine central ideas or themes without doing a close reading. You cannot integrate and evaluate contents in diverse formats without doing a close reading. So I'm really happy that I think both of the speakers gave us the idea that doing these discretely is not doing anything, and that we want to think about comprehension really holistically, and that's what that says. Okay, so I have 2 quotes that I want to focus us on. Both of them are about teachers. And so what I want to talk to you about just briefly is my unit of change is teacher. Most often, staff developers' unit of change is student, and we skip the teacher. And what happens is if we skip the teacher learning, the student learning doesn't come, and we never take long enough for student outcomes to come. So I feel like we should be much more selfish about how we interpret the Common Core and say that for these next 2 years, while we're learning and adapting to new standards and new practices, let's think about us, and the kids will be fine. But if we don't think about us, the next year the same thing happens, the next year the same thing. So we sort of have to bite the bullet and say, I'm working on my own learning, and that's what I hope to focus you on today. That's what this focuses on. Transitions to these new standards will no doubt require hard work, and that means of the teacher. And this is right from the Common Core website. You've read this a million times, but I just want to let you call your attention to the very last sentence. Teachers will continue to devise lesson plans and tailor instruction to the individual needs of the students in their classrooms, which is what we've been doing. But they're asking us to do something different. So I think that's confusing, and I want to try and clarify it. Okay, so Dr. Shanahan yesterday talked about this as hard teaching. And I took that idea last night and started to really think what hard teaching means, and I came up with 3 things, okay? So hard teaching takes practice. And it's really odd to think about practicing in front of a group of students, but if we don't think about it that way, then hard teaching never gets any easier. Hard teaching, secondly, for reading, relies on teachers' understanding of their own comprehension. And I'm going to just pause on that one for a second. You're all good readers. Most of you have not had the opportunity to think very carefully about your own reading because you were such good readers all along. So I have this story. I was, of course, a good reader like you were, and I went through elementary, middle school, high school, and eventually I got to college and I got to statistics and I couldn't read the textbook because I had no strategies. I had no idea how to read it. My roommate, who had struggled more, taught me because she had been taught. And even that little thing didn't cause me to reflect enough on my own comprehension. I work with teachers all the time and they say, I don't know how I make meaning, I just make meaning. And part of today is I want us to become more reflective about how we make our own meaning. And then, as I said before, this kind of hard teaching requires an emphasis on the teacher as the unit of change. So you will teach better for the Common Core if you change. And that's really what we want to focus on. Okay, so let's try it, okay? So I'm going to have you silently read something that's hard, okay? And I don't know why there's all those little dots in the middle of it. You can ignore that. But I'm just going to give you about 2 minutes to read this, and let's all read it silently. Okay, I'll stop you there. Just like you to think, just for a minute, just think. What did you do as you were trying to make meaning? What did you do? And just think about it. In order for students to do close reading of complex texts, they have to approximate, that's Lucy Calkins' language, they have to approximate adult behaviors. They have to become you as a reader. Once they become you as a reader, they can get better than you. And that's what we all want. We want our students to be better than we are. But first, they have to know how you do it. In order for them to know how you do it, you have to know how you do it. It's not enough to do it. We have to know how we do it. And so as you're going through all of this learning during the week, during the summer, next year, pay attention to how you're making meaning, because there's no magic strategies that some book is going to give you. The strategies that are most useful for students are the strategies that you use. And I'm going to show you in a minute a mini lesson that affords them the opportunity to approximate your behavior in a very particular way. This is too hard, okay? As Dr. Shanahan said, in order to activate strategies intentionally, the text has to be too hard. If I gave you something easy, you would be doing your strategies, but you wouldn't know it. When you read this, you're approximating, the strategies are becoming overt and out in the open. Okay. So I'm going to come back to that in 1 minute. I want to give you 4 theoretical ideas, and then I'm going to give you classroom practice, I promise, okay? Because you're so good about listening to all our theoretical ideas. But the first one I think is life-changing, okay? It was life-changing for me as a teacher. The idea of standards of coherence is such. When I gave you that piece of text that was too hard, you did something because you expected it to make meaning. Your experience has been that if you work at a text, it will make meaning. If a text for you does not make meaning, you stop. So let me give you an example. If you're reading along the sports page and you all of a sudden realize that you've read 12 paragraphs, but you have no idea what's going on, and it doesn't matter to you, you close it and you put it away. You don't bother with it. That's what adults do. If they're reading something that they're not paying attention to and it doesn't matter, they put it away. If you're reading something and you're not paying attention and your boss told you to read it, you recognize that you're not paying attention and you go back and you do something. And if you don't do it the first time, you do it the second time. That's because you have a very high standard of coherence, meaning if the text doesn't hang together, you're bothered by it. Okay? Students have a low standard of coherence generally. This isn't demeaning to students, this is just factual. They've spent a lot of time with text that didn't make sense. So if they read something that doesn't make sense, it doesn't bother them. They just move along, they look at the last word, they close the book, and they go play soccer. Because that's what we've told them to do. So our job as teachers of English language arts is to raise their standard of coherence, make them bothered if something doesn't make sense. If you can get a student to take a very hard passage, read 2 sentences and look at you and say, I don't understand, you've met a standard. I mean, that is uber self-monitoring, and that's what we want for students. And our job is to get them to do that. So your heightened standard of coherence is where we want them. You would imagine that struggling readers have an even lower standard of coherence, right? Nothing ever makes sense to them, and they're very comfortable with that. Okay, so we're trying to get them discomforted. That's the first one. Here's the second one, which is related. There are 2 major kinds of comprehension breakdowns that interfere with close readings. One is called meaning, one is called attending. Let me explain attending first. When you're reading the sports page that I talked about and you lose your concentration, you don't make meaning, but that's because you're not paying attention. So it's not that you couldn't make meaning, you're just not. So if you need to make meaning, you're going to go back and you're going to read it again, but you're going to tell yourself to do something, right? You're going to say, okay, stop thinking about going to the grocery store, or I'm going to take out my pen and I'm going to underline things, or I'm really going to try and figure out what this means. So you do something and then generally you understand it. That's an attending error. So when students are reading and they're not monitoring themselves, they're not paying attention, it doesn't mean they can't understand the text. It means they aren't understanding the text. And this doesn't mean they're lazy or have ADD or bad students, anything like that. We all do it. And we need to alert them that they're doing it. Because their standard of coherence is so low, they don't know it. So they think they've read because their eyes have met words. And eyes meeting words is not close reading. It's word calling. Or word calling in the head. So that's an attending error. And we teach 2 attending errors in particular ways, and we'll get to that in a minute. The other kind of error, or as I call it, a comprehension breakdown, is meaning. And that means no matter how hard I work at this, no matter how much attention I pay, I'm not going to get it because there's something I don't have. Okay, maybe I don't have the vocabulary. Maybe I don't have the conceptual understanding. So somebody was trying to read, a student was trying to read something on the infield fly rule without understanding the rules of baseball. So no matter how much attention he pays, he's never going to get it because there's prerequisite knowledge that he doesn't have. So that kind of breakdown you attend to differently. You don't say reread to a student who's reading about the infield fly rule but doesn't understand the rules of baseball. He can reread it all he wants. He's never going to understand it. So you use a different strategy. So in these 2 categories of strategies, there's a lot of robust teaching. But the very first thing I ask middle school and high school teachers to do with their students is show them the difference. Because once they know the difference, they're so empowered. Because if they understand that, yes, you would understand it if you did these things, good. But we don't want to waste their time having them try to understand something that they're not going to understand, because then they're going to get irritated with us. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So those are the 2. The third one, briefly, if I give a kid a hard text, there are a million things I can teach him. I can teach him about the vocabulary. I can teach him to look at the bold words. I can teach him lots of things. And what I generally do is teach the thing that's easiest for him to learn, because that's the most satisfying to me. So if the word is, retributions, and in the sentence, and it's clear he doesn't understand, I can teach him the word retributions, and I can feel good, and he can feel good, and we all learn something. But actually, it doesn't do me much good at all to teach him sort of the low-hanging fruit. So one of the things I ask teachers to do, which is a great act of teacher self-restraint, is to say to yourself, there may be errors, and I'm not going to attend to those errors because I'm going to work on these errors. And these errors are the big ones, which we call the struggle points. And the struggle points are the things that keep you from being able to read at a higher level. So the struggle points are the big comprehension things. And I'll tell you that the biggest comprehension thing in middle school and high school, the research says, is understanding that texts have an internal organization. And it's so rare that we teach that we teach kids to look for one side and then the other side, or the cause and the effect, or this person said and this person said. Because looking for those helps them both to attend and to make meaning and to understand that texts in some ways can be predictable. And even if they're not predictable, at least we know what rule they're violating. So what I wanted to remind us is that we call it teaching around the text, and those of you who teach English language learners can attest to the fact, and strugglers, you can teach them vocabulary every day of the week. There's always a text where there's vocabulary to make mistakes, and I'm a very proponent of vocabulary instruction, but often they don't get to comprehension. And comprehension is how we get close readings moving, because it helps them understand what vocabulary they don't have and then be able to activate vocabulary strategies. It's really neat that way. Not neat like neato, but neat like in package. Yes?
I'm sorry, I'm confused on that. Don't you make things by chance that if they're not understanding some vocabulary, they're going to miss out?
Absolutely. So sometimes the strategy is when you read something and you don't know the main verb, the meaning breaks down. But what we want them to see is the meaning breaking down. The importance isn't the word, the importance is you kept reading and the meaning broke down. So that's a struggle point where an isolated vocabulary word is an isolated vocabulary word. So they aren't, in my experience, they aren't understanding the distinction between that lesson. They're learning the word recharged instead of learning that you skated by the word recharged and didn't make meaning. Does that clear that? Yeah. Anything else? Okay, these are all hard and big. Okay, and then finally, and this is controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that the teachers that I work with are conflating the teaching of literature and the teaching of literacy in such a way that the teaching of literacy is not getting the attention that we would hope. And I've begun to think and write about it as literature as a content. There is a content that we decide to cover, or the standards tell us to cover, or we choose to cover, or we think is important for students, and that's literature. And its themes, and its ideas, and its metaphors, and all of those things. There's also literacy, which is the strategies that help you read literature. But we have to practice those strategies on something other than the great literature also. Because I don't want to ruin everything for everybody because they're reading word by word. And I want them to love the literature in many ways. And I absolutely agree with Dr. Shanahan that they don't learn to read the Scarlet Letter better by having us read it to them. However, there has to be a place where we teach them how to read the Scarlet Letter better, not on the Scarlet Letter. Because if we're doing both things, it's like decoding and comprehending at the same time in second grade. If we're learning to read simultaneously with reading to learn, learning to read often gets short shrift, which again doesn't mean they don't cross over. Okay, but this is a big structural concept in middle school and high school, and I'm just going to show you something that makes it clear, I think. So I did this for a middle school that I'm working with that has a 110-minute social studies language arts block, so this is very irrelevant to most of you, but I'm just trying to make the point that we organized it as such that the study of literacy, which is the study of reading, not the study of texts, how you read. And we read a lot of really difficult texts, and we don't spend a lot of time worrying about the content of those texts. So we pull text from lots of different places. And that's what we do. We do it whole group, we do it small group in literacy, and we do that every day. Then this faculty decided to break up writing and literature. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they work on a novel or a short story or poetry or an author study, book clubs, however you teach your wonderful literature. And on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they do writing workshop to teach kids how to write in the Common Core genres, argument, expository, and argument, expository, narrative, excuse me. So then they also do social studies. But I just wanted to show you in the thinking that they've pulled apart literacy. And in literacy, they teach kids to approximate adult reading. And they listen to kids read individually. And this is 7th and 8th grade, and I've pushed it into 9th and 10th also, and I want to share with you the structure of it, because those are the two things that help kids with their reading. Then they get to go over to literature, and guess what? They're much better at reading whatever we put in front of them because we've let them practice. It's the sports metaphor. So you have to do calisthenics and jog and lift weights in order to play football. The calisthenics and the lifting weights and the jogging aren't football. They're practicing. And then on Sunday when you play football, you're better. So we want to break it up and really attend to them so that they get better at the literature. Yes?
So then during that literacy time, are you talking about Scarlet Letter, how you can practice other things that you tackle Scarlet Letter? So during the literacy block, are you talking about the things that you need to tackle, whether it's the social studies reading or to tackle the literature reading?
Yes, so I'm using the data that I get from listening to them read to plan what it is I want, and I'm going to show you that lesson, which is it's the anchor lesson.
It's not like a drop everything you read.
It's not, it has nothing to do with drop everything. I support independent reading for sure, but it has nothing to do, no, absolutely not. It's much more instructional than that. So that's just for your consideration. Sorry. Okay, so I want to tell you about this instruction and how it works. So I'm in my literacy block and I'm teaching kids to read and I'm listening to them read and I'm noticing something about their reading. And I'm trying to get them to do what I do. I'm trying to raise their standard of coherence. So I have how many minutes is that? 16-minute whole group activity, which includes only 8 minutes of me and 8 minutes of them, that I start my literacy block with. I do it every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I learned from a really excellent teacher that every lesson should have an architecture or a shape. And this is the shape of the lesson, which I think is just an amazing idea. And it's also awesome in the content areas. But every lesson should look a certain way so that students know what's coming and they know how to, students can't pay attention you can't either, right? I mean, and so they know how to pay attention to this because we do it the same way every time and it makes sense to them. So this is the architecture of this lesson, and the lesson is called I'm a Reader. Okay, so they know when we start I'm a Reader that I'm going to be giving them explicit instruction in approximating adult reading, okay, which is what I want them to do. So I'm going to just tell you it and then I'm going to show it to you. Okay, so the first thing I do is the launch, and in the launch I just basically tell them what I'm going to do. And I do the launch the same way every single time, and by March they're rolling their eyes because I say it the same way every single time, but I do it anyway because I think it cues their attention. It's like a dinner bell. Ding, 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 we're gonna start. It takes 1 minute. Then I'm going to model my own reading, and Paula yesterday was talking about don't talk about model it. I wanna not talk about modeling. I'm gonna model my modeling for you. So there's a lot of levels to that, but I'm gonna model it. But here's the thing that's different, that's changed my modeling. I'm gonna model on a text that's too hard for me. Because if I model, I can't model on a text that's not hard to me, I'm faking it. So in order to show them actually what I do, I have to do it. And this is very scary and revealing for a teacher because I could very possibly not be able to understand it. And then I have to tell them that sometimes readers do lots of strategies, but there's something missing, and what are they going to do about it? Okay, so I do that for 3 minutes. When I work with teachers and I coach them, I have them set a timer, so you actually know what 3 minutes feels like, because the students are so much fun to talk to, and this is so much fun to do that all of a sudden things stretch out. After I'm done modeling, I turn around and I say to them, what did you notice that I did when I was a reader? And I have them write it down, or I have them share it, or I have them tell their partner, however, whatever works for you. Then I give them a text that's too hard for them, and I have them try what I just did. Never assessing it, never expecting that never giving them anything that I care that much about the content of, because we're just practicing. Okay, and we do that for 8 minutes. 8 minutes is actually a long time. When I do this in 6th grade, I might do 5 minutes. I might do 5 minutes in 9th grade. I'm giving you 8 minutes just to be generous, but really I think it could be much shorter than that. If kids concentrate really hard, they can do a lot of really hard reading in 5 minutes, and then you get fatigued. I mean, we all do. Okay, so, and then the last thing I do is what we call the extension, which is, it took me a long time to realize that kids think that what they learn in their language arts class doesn't go into the hall with them. Like, it stays in the language arts class, and then when they go to science, it never occurs to them. And I appreciate my science colleagues really working on reading strategies in science and the disciplinary knowledge. But these are these generalized reading strategies that I can't teach reading about science the way a science teacher can, but I can teach generalized reading strategies really well. And so I want them to have both of those. So the extension is, and you'll hear me do it, later when you're doing your science homework, I want you to remember blah, blah, blah. And I don't expect them to do that for like the first 20 times I say it. But on the 21st time, I think they might. So Carol Lee this morning talked about repetition. Like, I never do a mini lesson unless I'm going to do it 1,000 times because it's only 5 minutes. And if they could learn it in 5 minutes, I wouldn't need to waste my time doing a mini lesson on it. So these are big old things. Okay, I'm going to show it to you. And then I'm going to ask you to talk at your table about what you see. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you as my colleagues for 1 more minute. I picked something that was too hard for me. When I pick these texts, I have a list of things that I care nothing about. And I go on the internet and I Google the thing I care nothing about, and I find PDFs which I can't cut and paste. So I find anything that's a Word, and I just find something that I don't care about. It doesn't have to be that hard if I don't care about it. Because if you don't care about it, you remember when, those of you who are parents, when your kids are young and you're exhausted and you're reading to them and you realize you've read 4 pages of Where the Wild Things Are, but you hadn't made any meaning. It's not that Where the Wild Things Are is too hard for me. It's that I was tired and didn't care about it, and I needed to attend. So it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to take it out of medical textbooks, but my heuristic is if I don't care about it. I don't know about it or I don't care about it. Okay, so that's how I pull it off. And now I'm going to turn you into my 8th or 9th grade students. Let's say it's a split. Let's say it's really radical. And we have a middle school, high school split. 8th and 9th graders, 14, 15. Okay, so here we go, and I'm going to return to you in 5 minutes. Okay, so good morning, students. It's Tuesday, and on Tuesday I always become a reader, remember? I want to remind you that when I'm a reader, I can't also be a teacher. I'm not smart enough. So when I read, I'm going to pretend that you are not here, and I am just reading by myself. I'm going to do the slight revision, which is I'm going to say what I usually think, because otherwise it's going to be very boring for you to just watch my back. Okay? So I'm going to read aloud, and I'm going to say what I'm thinking as I'm reading. Your job is to make sure that I don't know you're here. If I know you're here, I cannot become a reader. Okay, so 8th and 9th graders, I'm going to ask you, you don't have to do this, I'm going to ask you to put your pencils down. I'm going to ask you to close your books. I'm going to ask you to fold your arms, and I'm just going to have you watch. I'm going to be a reader for 3 minutes. Okay, and when I'm done, I will return to you. Okay? All right. Okay, so here I go. Okay, the term supply side, let me try again. The term supply side economics is used in 2 different but related ways. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I remember that I know that when somebody says something is used in 2 different ways, that I know there's going to be an A way and a B way. And I'm going to write my A way and my B way down so I can keep track of them. Some use the term to refer to the fact that production or supply, okay, I've lost my, I don't know what I just read. I'm going to try it again. Some use the term, I guess some economists use the term to refer to the fact that production or supply, I guess they're using those interchangeably, but I'm not sure. That's kind of a weird place to put a parentheses. Underlies is not above, but is below. Consumption and living standards, I still don't have it. I still don't have it. I'm going to try from the beginning. The term supply side economics is used in 2 different ways. I got that. Some economists use the term to refer to the fact that production, I think it's the word underlies that's bothering me, that production is a part of consumption and living standards. Okay, so if I think about that, I think what they're saying is that producing things is related to consuming things, and consuming things is related to how we live. So, actually, I think I'm right. I think that is it. Okay, so production is a part of consumption. So how much you produce is how much you consume. How much you consume is related to your living standards, I guess. In the long run, our income levels reflect our ability to produce goods and services that people value. Okay, I get that. They're saying that we get paid for things that people want. Higher income levels and living standards cannot be achieved without expansion in output. All right, I stopped paying attention there because I realized I'm supposed to be looking at whether they're the 2 different but related ways, and I've completely lost that. But I do understand the sentences, but now I need to go back, but I'm getting tired, so I'm going to stop because this was really hard. And I'm going to return to you, 8th and 9th graders. Thank you so much, because I absolutely forgot you were here. Forgot you were here, and I was able, this is hard stuff, and I was able to concentrate on it. So I'm going to ask you, what is it that you noticed I did when I was a reader? Let me raise their hand and tell me one thing you noticed that I did when I was a reader. Okay, I talked to myself. I certainly did. And sometimes I talk to myself inside my head, and sometimes I talk to myself on paper. So that was one thing I did. Yes, what's something else? And I'm writing this on chart paper when I'm.
You reread.
Okay, I reread, and I didn't just reread the same thing again. I reread with a different something. So I reread. Yes. What else?
So you broke it into different pieces to try to make it.
Okay, I broke it into different pieces to try and make meaning. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, this is the most brilliant 8th and 9th grade class I've ever had. Yes.
Use word clues to determine structure of the passage.
Okay, so I looked and I saw things, and I sort of like I prepared, but I didn't prepare before I read anything. I read a sentence and then I prepared, and you have all these other things I know, but that's a lot. So I'm going to add these to the chart of strategies that I used last week and the week before. And I'm going to pass out to you a text that I'm telling you is hard, just like this was hard. And I'm going to ask you to try and do what I just did, either in pairs, individually, in writing, or not. So I vary it. Okay, so you're going to do that for 5 minutes, and I'm going to go peek at the kid who never pays attention, and I'm just going to sort of wander around, and maybe I'll have somebody read it out loud to me and try to do the think aloud. And then I'm going to come back, and I'll take your question in a second. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to say, okay, somebody tell me what strategy you used and what happened. So they're going to then articulate the strategy. So they're hearing about this, and this isn't an abstract strategy like inferencing. This is something you do. Okay, I mean, this is actually something you do. And then I'm going to say, okay, you know what? I think this strategy of trying to figure out if there were two sides is going to be really helpful in history. Because in history, there's almost always two sides, right? That's what. So when you're doing your history reading, when Mrs. Sanders, assigns you chapter 4, I want you to try this, and then come back and tell me that you tried. If you come back and tell me you tried, I'll give you extra credit point. Okay, and then we move on with our day. Okay, so that was it. That was it. And almost in real time, except that I didn't have you do it, which it would have added 5 minutes. Okay, so would you just for a moment talk at your tables about what you saw and noticed about this instruction, and then I'll kind of circulate around. Yeah.
When you're giving them the passages, does each student have a passage that's specifically hard for them, or do they all have the same passage?
So in middle school and high school, I do a lower, a middle, and a high. And these are called our practice packets, and I just pass them out at the beginning of the year, and there's tons of little, because you see it's teeny. There's tons of little passages, and if somebody I feel like is moving, then I maybe move there. But I do 5 in elementary school, but I do 3 in junior high and high school. All right, I'm gonna answer 3 questions. One question was about differentiation. So in junior high and high school, I use 3 levels of text, and I don't Lexile them, I eyeball them. Because if it's not right, who cares? It's like a 5-minute thing. But I try to get kind of like a lower packet, a middle packet, and a higher packet, and we call these our practice packets. This is not reading, this is practicing reading. It's not fun, necessarily. Reading is fun. Your independent reading is fun. When I read to you, it's fun. When you read in literature, it's fun. This is practice, just like calisthenics, right? Okay, so I have 3 different levels. I give them a packet of it. If you seem like you're getting really much better, maybe I'll switch packets. And you can see they don't get very far. I actually don't want them to get very far. So I give little tiny things. I can use the same text for 3 weeks. I just haven't put a line over where they stopped. So that was the first question I had. The second question I had was, do you know what you're going to do? And it's half and half. Half, I try really hard to let the text tell me what I have to do, because that's what real readers do. They don't say, okay, I'm going to question this. They say, wow, I think if I question this, I might make meaning. But I do also have a notion of what they need. And so I'm going to do a little of this. Somebody asked me if they ever say, why didn't you use this strategy? I mean, maybe I'd be happy if they did. I haven't had that question. But there's lots of other strategies. I just didn't use them today. I could have looked this up. I mean, there's lots of other things, and that's in my list. So I want to have them have a whole bunch of strategies that they can draw from. And I'll just say, this has been, it's very plain teaching, but this has been the most exciting thing that I've seen teachers do and done with them, because it's so little. But it's such a small investment of time, but it's really, because then we start a vocabulary of, I'm a reader, me, and there's always something that's hard for me as the teacher. There's something that's hard for you. Let's puzzle it together. And I think that's really been a gift. Yeah?
When you get something that you picked out randomly and you can't think about it at all, and you give up,
Yeah.
right? Do you try to make sure that the next time you've got something that you can sort of pre-plan it? Because you don't want to show the kids, oh, you gave up, I gave up again.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. So one of my best strategies is to find something else about this that's a little easier. So even if it's tremendously hard, I can say, you know what, I'm going to split the screen, I'm going to go on Google, I'm going to find something on this that's easier, and then I'm going to try and read it again. Which is what I would do if if my friend was dying of a disease and I had to read about the disease and I couldn't understand it, what would I do? I would go and find something else. I would call a nurse. So another strategy would be, I don't know, I'm going to go ask Mr. So-and-so next door because he's the science teacher, and I'm going to try and read this again. So I think giving up isn't generally my strategy. But yeah.
Do you ever have trouble, or do the teachers ever have trouble with students who are trying to read with the teacher and then can't really hear what the teacher is saying because they can't do two things at once?
I have found they are very fascinated that you are reading. I do this with writing too, I'm a writer, but they are very fascinated, and I haven't had much management trouble at all, and sometimes I turn my back even and read it, and so no, I really haven't. Sometimes when I say, what did you notice, they'll tell me something about the content, and I'll say, okay, that's really interesting, what did you notice about the way I read it? Because I'm trying to focus on, this is the closest reading I know how to do, which is I'm not going to give up until I really understand it. Not superficially, really understand it. You don't do this kind of reading on everything. You do this kind of reading on some things, and that's another thing we want to learn. Yes?
Do you ever annotate as you're
That is a strategy too. I just didn't have my pen. Sometimes I would annotate, yeah, and sometimes I don't. But sometimes I certainly do. So, I do what I do. And sometimes in my life, there's a journal article, it's too hard for me, I start writing on it. Absolutely, yes.
So we have the upper level kids, 6 through 12, and some of them have reading difficulties already. They've probably given up. So for those kids, we're going to try to challenge them with higher text. They don't have the motivation. We're going to tell them we have to work harder. We're going to model. How do we really motivate them that this is of value?
So my experience with them, especially, is they are very grateful to try something on 2 sentences. Part of the thing with strugglers is that everything is so overwhelming. And so they aren't motivated by this particularly. This is practice. And nobody loves it. And I don't try to sell it as anything but hard work. But we're going to do this hard work for a very short amount of time. And then the motivation for 6 through 12 students is finding something they like to read. This doesn't work unless there's also good stuff to read. Because there's no reason to lift weights if you're not eventually going to want to be stronger for something. So that's a very great question, complicated, and one that
Then we've got to get them into the concept of science and social studies and applying these skills.
Absolutely. And who would be if there wasn't something interested to follow up with? One more question, please.
I'm trying to visualize what it looks like after the guided practice.
Okay.
You have a whole class and they read different packets,
Yeah.
different levels. Do they pair share or do they put it on chart paper?
Okay, so you help me transition into my next thing.
Okay.
Okay, so I say, they did what so I say stop, okay, now a couple of you share out. Okay, now later when you're reading in social studies and doing your homework, okay, then we start the next part of the class. We're done. And the next part of the class is small group instruction. And if you're not in my small group, you're reading independently. Okay, so the next part of that was about 16 minutes. The next part of that 45 minutes, and this is to support close reading. This is not to support literature. We do that elsewhere, but to support close reading, then I'm going to put them in groups and I'm going to have them read a text that's too hard, like Dr. Shanahan recommended, to me for 2 minutes. And I'm going to listen. And I'm going to give them a cue. So I'm now going to customize my instruction. So I just gave everybody the same different texts. Now I'm going to give same text, different strategies. Isn't that cool? Okay, I'll say it again. So I just gave everybody the same strategy that I modeled, but I gave you different texts because you're not as good a reader as she is. Now I'm going to give 5 of you who are about the same text. And I'm going to have you each read it for 2 minutes just to me. You're sitting in a group, but you're ignoring him. He's reading to me. And I'm going to listen, and I'm going to give him something that I hear. And in the rest of this PowerPoint, it talks about what you're listening for. And I'm going to give him a cue that's only his. So in any given 45 minutes, they've practiced 2 strategies. one that they watched me model, one that I talk to them about. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes I can say, you know what you could do here? Remember when and that's how you hook your whole group to your small group. I'm also data collecting, because whatever he does, now I know. Okay, he's not doing this. Okay, he's running over those vocabulary words. Okay, he's reading through the punctuation. No wonder. Okay, he's not looking at the bold words. No wonder. Da, 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 da. Yes, you had a question.
You know, I've read a lot about the whole reading, trying to figure out, because I've seen it two different ways, like how you were doing it and breaking it down like that. And then when Shanahan talked about how you read it once, get the idea, read it twice, look for these, read it a third time, do that. So they're both close reading, but you do it two different ways. Is that
That's a strategy that I might do. So sometimes, I don't believe that students every time need to read it 3 times, but sometimes I'm going to say, you know what, the first thing I'm doing is just read it. I'm not going to worry. Okay. So and I support that strategy, absolutely, but I want them to learn other ones too.
Yeah, just well, as we talk in our district, okay, close reading, I want people to think, okay, you know, them to understand you say close reading doesn't mean it's just this or it's just his way of doing it, and that's, you know, having the same language.
Yes.
This Common Core is huge, and when I say it, I want people to understand, oh, that's what close reading is when we break things down, or is it when we look at the author's craft and structure, you know, I don't know.
I think of close reading as what you do with something that's too hard, because that's how you activate. And I don't want everything to be a close reading, because I want some things to be fluent and fun and you know, all of that kinds of things. And I want them to know the difference. And that's really my goal. So the language that we use is, you know, I want to do what my teacher does. And that's the language that I expect to you know, permeate. Yes?
Are you taking running records while they're doing this?
Okay, so I don't take running records after kids are fluent, but I am, with my notebook, noticing that his comprehension breakdown was one where he was reading atonally. He had no inflection. Okay, and I'm noticing that she started reading without even looking at the picture. And so I'm going to write those down, then I'm going to look across them, and then I know what to focus on in my mini lessons, because half the kids aren't doing this. But I'll just say one thing about teaching, this hard teaching. You have to have the rest of the class managed, because it's really hard to listen to a kid read individually and know what to say. And if you're worried about management, you cannot do it. So I say to teachers, unless they can independently read by themselves, self-selected text, don't start. That's the first thing that has to be put in place for all of this to work. So it all hinges on that. And I don't mean that they should be reading independently for 45. I mean, they have to have a book. They have to have a book that they care about and can concentrate on for 10 or 12 minutes. And some of your kids can concentrate forever, but everybody has to be able to concentrate. Yes?
Is your guided practice pre-planned? I mean, did you do a lesson plan ahead of time so you know who those kids are and the group that you're going to be calling back? Is it always changing from day to day? And
Okay. Yeah, so the guided practice is the everybody doing it. This is a strategic reading group,
All right.
and that is pre-planned.
It is pre-planned?
Yes.
Is it based on the previous day?
It's based on, no, it's not that fine, because I'm only gonna meet each group once or twice a week. So it's based on, I put them in groups based on whatever I want, a map score, fluency, whatever, and then I listen to them read, and then I adjust them all over the place. Based on, you know, so if he starts reading way stronger than they are, I keep using you as an example because you're right here, then I'm going to watch him next time, and if he still does it, I'm going to put him in your group because you're stronger. Yes?
I just have a quick question. You know, way back when I went to school, I had one reading education class that was part of my entire degree program. And I feel like some of what you're asking me to do, and I'm willing to do it, is to diagnose what they're not doing and to be able to give them strategies.
I
can
totally.
tell you 5 things that I do to help me read, but beyond that, so I guess what I'm looking for is there like if there was one book more than anything else that you would read to help get a foundation, what would it be?
Maybe Corinne, if there was, well, can I just say one thing about that? One thing that you said is, I know the 5 strategies that I use. Start there.
Yeah.
Because those are good. I mean, and you have to trust them. But I did, and I'm not going to get to my handout, but I wanted, in the handout is a continuum of the kind of strategies that people give students from the lowest kind to the highest kind. So I hope you'll have time to sort of look at that. And maybe, Corinne, would we have a recommendation for a strategy? I mean, I recommend my book, but.
For what you're talking about, yes.
Okay.
I recommend yours. But as far as diagnosis assessment, I will kind of highlight that discussion in a minute.
Okay, so she's going to highlight.
That's too big.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you, and it's really what the Common Core has changed the way that English language arts is taught. And we are it's both a blessing and a curse. I mean, sometimes I wish we didn't know so much, right? Anyway, I don't want to take up more time than I had, and there was so much more I wanted to talk to you about, but my most important thing was to get you these ideas of how you raise the standards of coherence and how you approximate adult behavior. So I hope you feel like you got enough of that, and I will hang around if you want to chat with me after. I want to let you have a break before you go on to your groups, and I wish you a good rest of the day, so thank you.